What is up, fam? Thank you so much for tuning in to So Real Sports Talk. I know you might be a little bit confused because you don't usually see me over here on Tuesdays because I'm always with my guy over to this side of me on Jack Hammer's channel. But we thought we'd do a little Tuesday, switch them up and come on my channel. Since you know what, it's one of those down weeks for the 49ers. So why not do it on my channel, right, Jack?
That's right. It's a little it's going to be an exciting week. We had OTAs start, with the media being able to show up last week, and then because of the holiday Monday, they pushed the media availability back till tomorrow. So it's perfect for us. We missed last week's show because I was up at Santa Clara for OTAs, and so it's great to be able to get back on and chat with you and do it over on your channel for a change. It's going to be fun.
I love it, man. And just give me, I mean, I know anybody that's tuned into you has seen you put out a lot of content after that. But what would you say, I guess, just for the people on this channel, what were some of, I guess, your biggest takeaways from your experience over there in OTAs? What stood out? What were expectations that were met?
About the quarterback, and I felt like it looked like Trey Lance was improved from where he was last year. It looked like his throwing motion was a little bit tighter. And they weren't asking him to do too much as far as downfield work. It seemed like their focus was really on kind of the intermediate game. And he looked good there. A lot of, a good amount of checkdowns, but he also had some really nice completions, kind of deep over the middle, in the 15 to 20 yard range. So Lance looked really good. Jordan Mason, the rookie running back, looked really good. He popped a really nice one at the end of practice when they were doing some team drills. They're not tackling at this point, so it's a little bit different, but for the running backs, it's hard to see, and then beyond that, the quarterbacks look good. The receivers, in particular, Juwan Jennings, the tight ends got a lot of work. Tight ends and running backs got a lot of work during the 7-on-7 period of it. So we'll see what this week brings. We'll see if there's maybe a couple more guys because there was a number of players missing. But all in all, I felt like it was a good practice last Tuesday, and it'll be interesting to see how week 2 looks.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's fun that, the guys are getting, OTAs mean we're that much closer to the season starting. And there's a lot to talk about as far as, specific to camp and OTA, because there are a lot of battles out there that I know a lot of us are excited to talk about. But that's not what I felt like we should do for this show. What I wanted to do, Jack, because even though we might not know who's starting or who's going to play necessarily at each position, we do know overall kind of what the talent pool is right now. And what I wanted to do was go over kind of, did this offseason solve some of the problems from last season? So obviously 2021, for all intents and purposes, was, I would say, an overachiever type year. I don't think that too many people had the 49ers going all the way to the NFC Championship game, especially with how the season started. So, but even though there was a lot of success, there were some common consistencies as far as issues with the 49ers. So I thought we'd go back and forth off the top of our head and just talk about what were some of the main weaknesses from last year's 2020-2021 team that made it to the NFC Championship, and whether or not you think John Lynch, Kyle Shanahan, and the rest of the 49ers brass did enough to combat those problems going into this season. So I'll pass it over to you. Anything off the top of your head were some major issues from last season?
Well, I think it starts off with field position, right? If you go back and you look at the 49ers starting field position last year on the offensive side, they were regularly starting deep in their own territory. Their average starting field position last year was their own 27-yard line. And that was fourth worst in the league, 29th overall. And that's not good at all. And then on the defensive side, it wasn't much better, but they were starting at their, it was about their own 30. So they were more on their side as far as scoring. So it just wasn't a good, their special teams. And I think that goes back to their special teams. And so when you saw the offseason, I know it's kind of been some folks have kind of panned it a little bit because their biggest acquisitions were were special teams guys. They weren't going to be helping to say the offense or the defense because playing those positions. But I think when you look at it, they went out and they addressed their coverage units, they addressed the return units. And I think with the guys that they brought in around that, the 49ers hope is that they're going to be able to step up in that area. And if you can get that ball, it's not even, if they can get to the middle of the pack in those two numbers, I think you're going to see that's good enough probably for a win or two, maybe even 2 or 3 wins just in that, because they'll be able to not have to go so far and the offense won't be so stressed as far as having to go the length of the field every time they touch the ball.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think that was definitely one on my list is the special teams. And you talked about the starting field positions. The 49ers last year lost, 5 games within 1 touchdown, or I think it was like they had like 5 to 7 games that were within a score. And, most of those were losses. Most of their losses were very close games. So you're talking about changing field position means maybe that same amount of yardage that you did, instead of you have to punt, maybe now you could kick a field goal, or maybe you get some momentum and now you're closer to the end zone and a field goal actually turns into a touchdown. So that's where you could start like peeling back points to get closer to flipping that, as far as losing by so many 1-score games. And I think you talked about the acquisitions. I mean, I think it starts with the coaching change, right, Jack? Like we have a new special teams coordinator. I don't know too much about his success. I know he's been, a special teams coordinator for the Seahawks for quite some time, but he seems like a pretty seasoned guy. I think he's been top 10 as a coordinator throughout his career, which would be a lot better than where the 49ers were last season. And then you talk about specific impact players, right? Ray McLeod is one of the best returners from last season. He's obviously been an acquisition for the 49ers. Then you got George Oden from the Green Bay Packers, who's a special teams ace, as well as Oren Burks, who's going to be safety / special team specialist, but also some of the guys they brought back from our own team, right? A guy like Jordan Willis, Jack, was somebody who showed out, in the playoffs against, Green Bay single-handedly, changed the way that game went with his, punt block, and then also, clearing out the guys so that Jimmy Ward could go in and make that field goal block. They brought him back. So they brought back some of the guys, and Jordan Willis was somebody who we only got to see play second half of the season. So now having a full season with him, with that continuity, plus some of the other guys that they brought in that were more geared towards special teams, you imagine that the front office isolated this as an issue and then really attacked it in the right way with the coaching changes and the personnel they brought in.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Odom, like you mentioned already, and the Burks, but also Tarvarius Moore. He was a one of their special team standouts before he was injured, and so we'll see how this works out. We'll see if these additions that they made plays out, and then on top of that, like you said, and you brought it, that was a really good one. The guys that they already have on their roster that are coming back, and Tarvarius Moore being one of them. If they can increase that, if you go back and you look at 2019, they were one of the better teams in terms of starting field position. They were 4th in the league in starting field position on offense. They were starting all the way out at their own 32-yard line. It was a big difference. And part of that was special teams. Part of it was the turnovers as well. But I just think that this is one of those things where it's kind of like the hidden yards of the game type of a thing, because everybody looks at the offensive output and the defensive output. They don't really take into account what the special teams is doing as well. And I think that this is one that they've taken steps to upgrade, and we'll see, in a couple of months if it starts to pay off.
Yeah. And not to mention too, the 49ers over the last 2 seasons as well, Jack, have drafted a lot of athletes, right? They've drafted more cornerback position. They've drafted more secondary. They've drafted, some guys that, are late round receivers and things like that, or running backs. Some of these guys can compete and, be in that special teams upgrades as well, because you're talking about younger, quicker, guys that are hungry to make a team, and maybe special teams is that avenue where they could actually make it. So I imagine that this team would have a lot of options to bring into special teams. It can kind of pick the best out of them to make sure that unit is a strength versus a weakness like they were last season.
Oh, no, it definitely is. They have a lot of guys to pick and choose from, and I mentioned Moore already, but then you add in a guy like Samuel Womack, Tariq Castro Fields, as rookies. if they can step in, those would be a big help as well. And even on the offensive side, you have you have Ray McLeod, like you mentioned earlier, and we'll see if like Trey Sermon or Ty Davis Price, if they get in there at all on the special team side.
For sure. And especially with a guy like Trey Lance, you want to make it as easy as possible for him to have a successful season. Field position could really play a role in that. And I think it also helps out Kyle Shanahan because starting at the 35 or 40 versus the, 25 or 30 opens up the playbook a little bit more. You have, more options that you could do there. It's not just about flipping field position through, getting a few first downs. Now you can actually attack more and be more aggressive. So I think overall, I believe that is one of the biggest issues from last season. But I also give kudos to the front office because I think they did enough, Jack, to flip that this season. What about you? You think they did enough?
Yeah, I think they've done a lot throughout, throughout the offseason to really improve throughout this roster, and it's going to be a lot of fun to see how this thing all comes together.
Sure. I want to bring up another one. For me, one thing that really stood out, and this was probably throughout the season, especially the beginning of the season, was just defensive penalties, right? The 49ers were one of the most penalized teams last season. Unfortunately, a lot of those were, it seemed like momentum changing type of penalties where pass interference, holding in the secondary and things of that nature. And a lot of that I think had to do with just the options that we had back there, to be honest. With all the injuries that kind of decimated the 49ers early on, with Verrett going down in week 1 and then Mosley not being healthy, at the beginning of the season, we leaned on a lot of guys off the couch, quote unquote, and young rookies. And it really affected, right? A lot of mistakes, a lot of head turning, a lot of, contact because you weren't in the right position. I do think that the 49ers did some good things with that this offseason, but I'll pass it off to you, Jack. What do you think about that being a major issue from last season? And do you think that the 49ers did enough to combat that this season?
In the secondary?
Or just overall with defensive penalties?
No, I think overall, I don't know if I would say it's the penalties. I guess if we're looking at the defensive side and the bigger penalties, they had a lot of pass interference issues, right? And weren't they
the most penalized, like, pass interference team by far last season?
Well, they definitely were early on. They got a little bit of a handle on it as the year went on, but they were definitely struggling with that in the first half. And then I think some of that had to do with losing their starters and losing Jason Verrett. Emmanuel Mosley was hurt for a while there, so they were playing. They were kind of not playing with their full hand. And then what you saw them do, a couple of different things. They stopped playing so much man to man. They started going a little bit more zones. That was part of what they were keeping everything in front of them by doing that. So they weren't having to worry about getting beat, those guys behind them. So they started taking that away a little bit with their zone defense. And I think that helped it out. And then this year, going out and getting Charvarius Ward, I think he's a big piece of this whole thing because he can lock down one side of the field and allow the other side to be, the defense to a little bit focus on the other side a little bit more. So, a guy like Emmanuel Mosley is going to become a bigger piece of the puzzle. And, they're just deeper also in that secondary. You start to look at it and you have Ward, you have Ambry Thomas coming back, you have Emmanuel Mosley coming back. And then you also have a Thomas. So if Verrett's healthy and able to play, you have Ward, Verrett, Thomas, and Mosley. That's a really strong top four compared to what they were dealing with last year.
Yeah, and I mean, Tom Bragg brings it up here. Thanks for joining in, Tom. Charvarius Ward only had a couple PI penalties last season. So I think between basically what you were saying, him and Mosley, Verrett, Thomas, we will have fewer penalties on defense. And that's a big key. Charvarius Ward was only penalized 4 times as a full-time starter for the Kansas City Chiefs last season. 2 of them were pass interference. 2 of them were defensive holding. So he is somebody who can play extremely well without making costly errors, which is a big key. And I think if I'm right, I think the 49ers were the most penalized pass interference team last season, and it wasn't even close. I think Tampa Bay was second, and if I remember right, it was a big, vast difference. So I do believe, like you said, the bodies that we have this year versus last year are really going to improve that, right? Because now we have bona fide outside, corners, bona fide guys that could be starters on the team, versus guys that are just band-aids because there was no other options, right? So all of our corners now are much younger, all under the age, I think, of 27, 28, which is good. I mean, with the exception of Verrett, but Ward is Travis Ward is young, Mosley's young, Ambry Thomas is young, Womack obviously coming in, he's very young, and whether Lenore makes the team, he's another young guy. So there's just a lot of youth there, and fresh bodies, and I think it's gonna be important too, because I don't think that they're gonna go to zone too much this year, Jack. I think now it's gonna be very much so press man, aggressive style with these corners that they got, all these assets that they've invested into it, and with the level of wide receiver play that the 49ers are going to face this year, it's going to be extremely important that these guys are able to defend and keep these receivers contained without making those errors. And I know you mentioned it was more first half, but I remember so much throughout the season, Jack, where a penalty by the secondary just kept the offense on the field, and it just seemed like they were just momentum changing type penalties where the defense was doing enough to kind of get off the field, and then a silly play here and there kept the opposing team in it, or moving the ball forward. And especially in these close games, those are make or break, I think. So I do think that with the new bodies that they do have, a chance to be a lot better. Do you think they've done enough, or do you think that still might be something to keep an eye on this season?
I think the secondary, I think what they've done on the defensive side of the ball is going to be enough. There's like, I kind of ran through their secondary earlier in my last response to you. It just seems like they're a much deeper group in the secondary. Their linebacker group comes back, and they've actually added to that, which their linebacker core was one of the stronger in the NFL last year, and they actually added to that when they brought in Oren Burks out of Green Bay. And then you look at the pass rush up front, and if that pass rush is able to get home, then that helps out the secondary as well. You don't have as many pass interference penalties because the ball's not going in the air because they're getting to the quarterback and knocking him around. So I think the way that they've addressed the defense is going to really help out that. And, just kind of looking through really quick, I know that they did have those issues throughout, but the pass interference things, penalties really cleared up after the Arizona game, the second one. They fell 3-5 at that. And then from that 3 and 5 point on, I think you saw a lot of their issues around the pass interferences on the defense, and then on the offensive side, you had the turnovers in between those two. Things really cleared up over the back half of the season.
That's great. Hopefully they could take that momentum moving into this year as well. And Tom Brake brings up another guy, Darqueze Dennard, who, for all intents and purposes, seems like the favorite in the locker room to win that slot corner position, which is kind of one of the only open positions out of the cornerbacks as far as not really knowing who's going to be that starter. It looks like Dennard has a chance, Quez, or another guy's, Dante Johnson, or Samuel Womack, I think could be a player there, even though I think you think he's more going to be groomed to play outside. Sticking to that slot corner, since Tom brought it up, who is your guess? I guess way too early because nobody's even we don't even have like mandatory camp yet, but who would you imagine being the front runner for that position now that K1 obviously is with the Broncos?
I think that, like Tom said, I think that people are sleeping on Darqueze Dennard a little bit here. Dennard was a first-round draft pick who was taken by the Cincinnati Bengals ahead of Jason Verrett and ahead of Jimmy Ward in the 2014 draft. So this is a guy who's been he was highly thought of. He has all the measurables. He has all the tools. He just needs to be in the right situation. The 49ers brought him in at the end of last year. This is a guy who hadn't really played in the slot a whole lot. They stuck him in there right at the end of the year against the Rams, and he played the whole second half of the 49ers defense in the slot. he only played the one game with them. But this is a guy who has the tools, like I said. He's been working with the first team defensive unit all throughout OTAs. This goes back to even the early sessions where the media wasn't on hand. And the reason I know that is because Fred Warner told all of us that during the pre-draft meetings when he came to the podium, and they were talking to him about kind of what they've been seeing on the field, because that's when OTAs had just started and they're in the early stages of it. But even back then, Denard was the guy that was working with the first group. So, they like him. Kyle Shanahan talked about, having been aware of Denard for a long period of time. So they really like what they have in this player. I've seen a lot of people forecasting maybe that it's going to be Emmanuel Mosley. We've talked about this before, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe it's going to be Emmanuel Mosley slipping into the slot. Maybe Samuel Womack's going to get there. And we'll see how that all works out. We'll see how it shakes out. But I think right now, Darqueze Denard is putting his best foot forward to earn that role.
Yeah, Jack, and I just feel that when it comes to Shanahan, if it's close, he's going to go with the vet over the rookie 9 times out of 10. And I just believe that position is going to be filled by a vet. Whether it's Denard, I think another person that could be there is Dante Johnson. He's played some slot, and I do believe that the team respects Johnson a lot because of his flexibility with what he's done for this team. So maybe that's the only position that he might be able to actually make the team with, because they're so stacked on the outside now. So I think it's probably going to be between Quez and Johnson in my estimation. Who knows if somebody else, stands out during camp though.
Well, I think the one thing that people, we start to look at that nickel spot, right? And everybody thinks about just the coverage, which is obviously important. But whoever that nickel, the way that the Friars use that nickel, all the teams do, but especially the Friars don't put a high emphasis on the nickel, as far as having to be a top flight player because of the way that they kind of scheme around them. But whoever's in that spot has to be able to defend the run, because that guy's really, and tackle the run, because he's basically your third linebacker. And so that's where Denard fits. That's also why Dante Johnson has always done okay in there. He's a guy, Dante Johnson, is the part of why he sticks around is because he can play corner, he can play nickel, he can play safety, he can do everything that they need him, anything where he works. And that's kind of a nice, having a guy that can plug and play all throughout in all your positions. Although he's not a top flight player at any one of them, that's still a key, piece to have. And I think when you look at Denard and Johnson, that's one of the things, and that's why I'm not so sold on Emmanuel Mosley. I don't really know if the Friars want to stick Emmanuel Mosley in there against the run. Same thing with Samuel Womack. I don't know if they really want to stick him inside against the run, because I haven't seen him be a guy that really wants to stick his nose in there all that often from his college film. It'll be interesting. Right now they've had Denard and Quantrez Knight. Those were the ones that were getting most of the reps last week at practice. And I mentioned this with the running backs on another stream. It could be a situation where they're just giving them the reps to really see what they have, and it might not be that they're necessarily their 1 and 2s in their minds right now. It's just that they want to be able to get as much look at them as possible, and this is the best time to do it.
Yeah, and Dante Johnson reminds me a lot of Brunskill, right? Because that's kind of, I think, why Brunskill continues to be brought back as well, is because his availability to play multiple different positions. He might not be, top tier at any one position, but he's good enough at enough positions that you got to find a way to keep him on your roster, either as a starter or depth pieces. So I agree with you as far as, what Dante Johnson brings as well.
Yeah.
So those are two that we feel like the 49ers have done enough to really combat, right? We talked about special teams, and then we just talked about penalties, especially in the secondary. I have a few where I'm not sure if the 49ers have done enough. And the first one that I want to bring up, Jack, is first half scoring. So I looked up the stats today, and the 49ers averaged during the regular season a little over 10 points per game in the first half. Then when you look at, their 5 losses in the regular season, they actually average less than that in those 5 losses. And when you look at just the amount of close games that the 49ers are in, and you look at just how deep, the NFC is going to be and how close the playoff picture is going to be, a loss here where you should have won here and there could be the difference between making the playoffs and being the number 1 seed. It looks like with how competitive the NFC is. Do you think, and especially with, I think, a guy like Trey Lance coming into his first year as a starter, you don't want to have to play too many come from behind type games where, you have to have a game winning drive week after week after week, or to be able to do that. And one of the best ways is, punch him in the mouth early, get on the board quick so that you're dictating things versus having to be reactive and play one of those, air it out type of games. When everything's moving forward, you can kind of be as balanced, like Kyle Shanahan likes to say. So how do you think the 49ers, or have the 49ers done enough to combat that? Do you think that they'll be able to go get over these woes of lack of scoring in the first and second quarter?
See, that's a tough one, and you go back and you look, and it's an interesting point that you bring up, because they were in the middle of the pack last year in this stat. They were 16th in the league, only 11.7 points per game. But if you go back in 2019, they were much higher. They were fourth at 15.4. They were actually second best in the NFC. I think that part of what you need to look at there is what was happening between those 2 years. In 2019, they were turning the ball over a lot on defense. They were getting a number of turnovers. They were giving their team short fields, or they were getting pick sixes and things like that. So I think that I'm going to say that I think that they did do enough, just because this goes back to the way that Trey Lance, I think, is going to be worth some additional points with the way that what he's going to be able to bring to the table. I think the wide receiver room is better than it was a year ago, especially last year. You look at the wide receivers, you have Ayuk and Samuel and Jennings. Those are the three that were already there. But I think Malik Turner is a much better receiver than Mohamed Sanu. I think that's kind of the same type of role there. I think Ray McLeod is an upgrade over what they had over Sherfield. I think Turner's an upgrade over Sherfield, and both of those two. McLeod's more of an upgrade over the other receiver. I can't think of his name right now. He didn't play for him last year. He was there in 2020.
Goodwin?
Number 13. No, not Goodwin. They let him go. He had injured his knee last year, and he was on the squad. But anyway, it doesn't really matter. I think that with McLeod and Turner and Danny Gray, you've got a better back three than you did last year. I think Ayuk and Jennings and Samuel, those were your top guys last year, and I think you look at it, and Turner and Gray and McLeod are a much better second group of receivers than what they had a season ago. So I think you get some additional points there. On the defensive side, we've talked about it. We feel like their pass rush is better. If you're rushing the passer and you're getting to the quarterback, I think that's where your turnovers come from. I don't think they were quite as good a season ago as they were in 2019. They were good, but Richie James, thanks, Tom. But they were, I think last year, they weren't as good last year at getting to the quarterback as they were in 2019. And I think if they can get back to that number, you'll see the turnovers follow.
Yeah, so this is one, Jack, where I'm not 100% sure that they solved it, because even when Trey Lance was there last season, he still struggled to score in the first half as well. And it seemed like a lot of their points came from 2-minute drills at the end of the second quarter that I think brought that number to that 11 point number or that you talked about, because first quarter points was pretty bad. Like when I looked through it, the first quarter points were pretty bad. Second quarter, you could see like a touchdown here and there. But if I look closer, I'm pretty sure a lot of those were in the 4-minute drill, 2-minute drill at the end of the second half, where it's kind of more on instinct versus called plays. I just hope that, they could get into Kyle Shanahan's scheme much quicker, right? It seemed like they struggled to have opening drive scoring. Like that seemed non-existent last season. And I think that's going to be very important because, for everything, maybe a lot of people are really hard on Jimmy. I mean, he is a seasoned vet. He's been there. He's somebody who has had a lot of game-winning drives or, can deal with the ups and downs and still be even keel. And we're not 100% sure about that with Trey yet, right? Because we haven't necessarily seen it. I mean, in Houston, they didn't score too much in the first half, and obviously he came back in the second half and what was a must-win game and, do it. So is there potential? Absolutely. But I can't for certain say that this year they're going to have a lot better scoring in the first half. I can tell you, Jack, I think it's going to be important. Like, that's going to make it a lot easier to reach the type of success that we're envisioning for this team if they could get, to more closer to maybe 20 points in the first half, like, 14 to 17 points versus the 10, 11 points that they were averaging last season.
Yeah, and you make some really good points because we did have that. The 49ers did have that issue a season ago, right, with scoring points and even with Trey Lance. I think that a lot of this goes back to what is Kyle Shanahan able to get comfortable calling plays for Trey Lance early? If he is, then I think that this solves some of the issue that you're talking about. I think he needs to get better with just the way that he manages the game with Trey Lance as well, because they gave up points in both of his starts by going for it on fourth down instead of kicking field goals. And they did it in Arizona. They did it when they played here against Houston. Instead of taking points, they're going for it. I understand wanting to do that because you have a big, strong running quarterback that can run the ball. But I think you need to be a little bit smarter about the way that you deploy it and take the points when they're there for you, get on the board. And then if you have to, maybe take a little bit more of those risks later on in the game.
Yeah, I really just hope that we get to see the 49ers be in the top half of the league when it comes to opening drive scoring. I think it's a stat that, kind of gets underlooked. Obviously there's a whole game ahead to make up for that, but I just think it's going to be very, very good for Trey Lance confidence and just the game overall. Like, if you can get that first half scoring up, Jack, I think then the second half really gives the defense a chance to utilize its strengths, which is that pass rush. If we could force teams into having to air it out and play catch up versus where they could just be consistent and balanced, if we could make teams one-dimensional, I think that just bodes well for the game overall, especially because we have so much depth at that defensive line position. That's what I really want to see them pick up. And I think a big part of that is just being able to be effective in the first half, which I think they weren't last season.
Yeah, well, and that's what we usually call this, the 49ers throwback show. So if you go back and you look back at the 49ers in the 80s under Bill Walsh, they were always one of the better teams in the first half. It seemed like they jump out on teams, especially in the postseason, but they'd go out and they'd be up 20-7, or they'd have a couple score lead quite often during their glory years. That was part of what they wanted to do, to go out and punch teams in the mouth, hit first, jump out ahead, shut the crowd up if they're on the road, get their crowd crazy if they're at home, and then be able to kind of dictate things in the second half and maybe run the ball a little bit more to just drain the clock and those types of things. So I'm with you. If the 49ers can get back to that 17 points per game in the first half number that they did back in 2019, they're at 15.4. If they can get back to that number, it bodes well for them.
Exactly. And I think the next biggest weakness, I think, plays a role in whether or not they can do that. And that is their rushing attack. So I think if most people just look at rushing attack because of, what Elijah Mitchell was able to do, because of what Debo did, second half of the season, I think overall people would be like, yo, this rushing attack was really good, or at least, good enough, which, you have to say is the case because they went as far as they did. But when you look in depth, it actually was a pretty inconsistent rushing attack, Jack. They only averaged 4.3 yards per attempt. And Debo, if you would take Debo out, because Debo himself averaged 5.1 yards per rush. If you took him out, that makes the running backs even worse, right? As far as their average yards per rush. And I think one of the reasons why the offense was so stagnant in the first half was because Kyle Shanahan loves setting up everything with the run. And he's very bullish on it. He's not going to change it up. He really believes that it's kind of like Novocaine. You give it enough time, it's gonna work. And if the rushing attack is only getting 4 yards per carry or close to that, I think that really hurts them. And I need to see the rushing attack average more 4.5 plus yards like they did in 2019 when they were ranked number 2 in rushing. I just don't know if that's the case, right? Do you think that they've done enough to fix that aspect of it, or do you even think it's as big of an issue as I think it is?
I think it's a big issue. They were really inconsistent with it. That's why Deebo Samuel got so many carries in the second half of the season when they decided to start giving him the ball as a running back, because they were very inconsistent in the running game, and they weren't able to sustain drives quite as well as they had in years past. It wasn't consistent. It was very hit and miss. They'd have a big run, 10-yard run by Mitchell, but then the next 2 times would be, a gain of 1 and a loss of 1 kind of thing. And then they'd have another big hit or something. It just wasn't consistent. And that's one of the things that they need to be able to get back to. And I don't know if they've addressed it enough. They still have the same group as they had last year, except with the addition of Tyrion Davis-Price. But beyond that, it's the same group. And so is it going to be on Trey Lance and his presence on the field to open up the rest of the running game? I think that's the question that we have to ask. Is at this point, I don't really see it. And Andrew makes a point. They missed McGlinchey. They didn't. I don't think they missed McGlinchey in the run game. I think they were fine in the run game. I think what they were missing was a back that could hit it. I think it was more of an issue with the back, and that's why you saw Deebo Samuel in there, because he was their explosive guy. Deebo Samuel was their Raheem Mostert. Deebo Samuel was their Matt Breida player from 2019, right? Tevin Coleman was, if you were looking at this 49ers team from last season, Elijah Mitchell was a mix of Tevin Coleman and Jeff Wilson Jr. He was their guy that was the guy that was like their banger. He was kind of what you expected Coleman to be, but they didn't have another back that they could go to that was going to take it to the house like they did in the years past, that's where Breida and Mostert came in. And they just didn't have that last year, and that's why Deebo Samuel was back there. And I don't think that they added that this year with the guys with Tyrion Davis-Price. I think they just added another bulldozer. So I don't know. I don't think the running game necessarily is going to be much different than a year last year.
Yeah, and I mean, to your point, I think all indications are all, at least the faithful and me included, I really thought that they were going to go after a burner in the drafts somewhere deep, like later rounds, and just get like a speed guy because, obviously Mostert left in free agency and they didn't have that change of pace back. But it seems like they have a clone. Like now it's like all 4 running backs that are going to be on the roster all are pretty much the same type of build, same type of style. And they kind of just double down on it, which it seems like they're going to be doing more of that power rushing attack. So I guess it's going to point to the offensive line, right, Jack? So where you said that they didn't miss McGlinchey, I think I would push back a little bit on that, Jack, because I did notice a big difference when McGlinchey went down, that they started running the ball to the left a lot more than they would to the right. Like it was pretty much like they were only running to the left, it seemed like, in a lot of those games. Obviously, because you have the best left tackle there, and that's their strength on the offensive line. McGlinchey is known for being a really good run blocker. For his deficiencies in his pass blocking, he is somebody who you can count on as far as run blocking. So I do think him coming back is going to open up all avenues to be able to do that. And I think another thing that may be an increase is if a guy like Jalen Moore can earn that right guard position. He is more athletic than Brunskill. He is younger, so maybe he could add some of that because that is, I think, opening up that right side to be able to run behind the right guard and right tackle so that the defense really has to pay attention to where the ball is going or where the rush is going, I think will help out. But it does seem like it's going to be one of those where they're punishing. And hopefully second half, that's where you start seeing, these 4 or 5 yard rushing attempts turn into 15, 20 yard plays just because the defensive line is gassed with the physicality that the offensive line is bringing.
Yeah, I think you're going to see the running game be very similar, like you said, and I think it's it's going to be more between the tackles because that's what they have. And I think the explosiveness in the offense is going to have to come from the right arm of Trey Lance.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The passing attack is going to be a lot more where the big plays come from rather than, the rushing attack that has been, the past few years. Anything else that you could think of, Jack, that you thought were weaknesses from last year?
In terms of the weaknesses from a season ago, I think we pretty much hit on them. The special teams were one. The lack of explosion in the running game was a big one. I don't think they addressed that. The quarterback position was addressed. I mean, if we were to go through a position by position group, I think, well, most folks, and myself included, feel like Trey Lance is going to be a better starting quarterback than Jimmy Garoppolo. I think the 49ers quarterback position overall is a weaker spot now because if Lance goes down, they don't have a solid backup quite to the extent that they did to see last year. I think that's Nate Sudfeld's okay, but he's not better, and that's a big one. That's a big question mark right there. That's probably a bigger question mark than any position is what happens if Trey Lance goes down. If Trey Lance goes down, I think the season is get ready for 2023.
Well, first, knock on wood, right? Because we don't want that to happen, but it is the NFL. I do want, maybe we could talk about it and segue in and we could end on this. I did see today on Get Up, I saw a clip. I think it was Mike Florio or Tenenbaum. Who's the guy who used to be the GM for the Jets? Is that
you're a big fan of guys that used to work for the New York Jets, huh?
don't put that evil on me, man. But anyways,
whether it be a scout or old general manager, it was Mike Tannenbaum, and
okay. Let me say it for people that might have missed it. So basically, he was talking about, they were asking, should they, and to they say it was kind of like one of those choose either this or that kind of question. So it was, should the 49ers trade Jimmy or not trade Jimmy? He said that they shouldn't trade Jimmy. And much to kind of the point that you made, giving up a guy like Jimmy who's had a lot of success with the team, why get rid of somebody unless you're blown away by a trade offer? Keep him for another season and then, let him walk after that. What did you think about that? And why should he do that? Why should the team do that or not do it based off of where you feel like they should go with that?
I mean, from just a straight football standpoint, it makes total sense for the 49ers to keep Jimmy Garoppolo, right? If you could get everybody on the team behind it, you can get all the players on board with it, and the coaches can manage it, and they can make it work with the salary cap. However, they whatever balls that they can juggle to make that work. If you could keep Jimmy Garoppolo on the roster, I think you're a better team from a depth standpoint. So I can understand why Tannenbaum would say that. That's something that I've said as well. As they've gone along with this offseason, I just don't think it works for the 49ers in terms of keeping this roster together. They only have $600 and something thousand in cap space right now, and that's based off of only the top 51, right? And when you start to fact, and so there's going to be some ways that they can move money around. They might be able to do it, but what are you losing by keeping Garoppolo on the roster? And I think the biggest thing that you could be losing is a new deal for Deebo Samuel. You're losing some money with Deebo Samuel because you can't give him the kind of money that everybody else has received. And so from that standpoint, I think the 49ers are in a little bit of a situation where they need to move on from Jimmy Garoppolo more than a player like, a guy like Tannenbaum is saying. And I think he knows it, but it's for argument's sake, it makes sense to say that you're going to go ahead and you want to keep him. Like I said, I understand it from a football standpoint in terms of team building, but in terms of moving forward and having a salary, if we were in 1986, this isn't even a question.
Right. I mean, clearly, if Jimmy accepted the role, and he's the best, he would be the best backup quarterback in the league, right? Because of all the success that he's had, and he's still, a viable candidate. What was interesting was he brought it up as it's actually going to be beneficial for Jimmy as well, right? Because he is coming off of shoulder surgery. No team has really been able to see him throw or would be able to see him throw. Who knows how he's going to respond, what the rehab and all that going to be. So, if he is along for the ride for a team and gets a chance to spell Trey in a few games here or there, if he's out due to injury or just rest or whatever the case may be, it might be a way of him being able to showcase his arm and still show people in the league that he has a chance. But he has a chance to still be a starter in the league. I just think there's too many things. I mean, he's been very vocal about how miserable that year was for him last season as far as, and just overall for the 49ers. I mean, Kyle Shanahan has flirted with every single quarterback that's been in free agency ever since Jimmy has been on the team. So it can't be an easy place to be. And at least, back then, Jimmy was the bona fide starter. He was QB1. Now that's not even the case. So you got to deal with all of these sub like, these little like underhanded, like subliminal type stuff. And not only that, you're the backup. Like, I just can't see Jimmy being happy in that situation. And for all the people that kind of hate on Jimmy, I still have a lot of respect for him. I think he handled the position very well, and he obviously changed the culture there as a quarterback. I think the 49ers should give him kind of honor him and give him that grace to be able to go find a place where he can vie for a starting job, whether that be cut him or, if there's a team that's willing to trade for him. The second reason is just that money, like you talked about. I think that $25 million to go into next season is just too important. You could just do a lot better. So they've already guaranteed Sudfeld his contract, so might as well just rock with him. Even though I do agree with you. I think even a guy like Sam Darnold would have been a better option as a backup than just having Nate Sudfeld there as well. But the team seems to like Sudfeld. They obviously drafted Purdy. Who knows what he's going to be able to be. So, that's kind of what they're going to rock with. And, Kyle Shanahan made it pretty clear that, Jimmy, they're still looking to trade Jimmy. And I do think that, he gets cut if they can't find a trade partner.
Yeah. I think you're right. That's why I said, from a football standpoint, it makes sense. You start getting into the personalities, you start getting all the other stuff. Garoppolo doesn't want to be in the 49ers. He doesn't want to be here. He's already said goodbye to everybody. Mm-hmm. The only reason he's here is because he can't throw because of the injury. And once he can, I think he's going to be gone. I think he's going to be a Carolina Panther in 2022. I could be completely wrong, but that's just my gut is telling me that he's going to be a Panther. So we'll see and I've been saying that for months. It just makes too much sense for him to land there because with what they have in Carolina, they're not going to win more than 5 games. So you need to find a quarterback.
Yeah, Carolina. I think Houston is a dark horse too, as far as being able to play there as well. So yeah, I agree with you. I think it's still fun to talk about. That's just why ESPN's still talking about it. But I think here Kyle Shanahan doesn't necessarily say things like verbatim. You kind of have to understand what Shanahan's saying. But I think anybody that understands Shanahan knew from the coaches' meetings when he was doing that interview, they basically passed the torch already based off of the coaching changes they made and what they've been doing with Trey. Trey's going to be the starter, and I just don't think that Jimmy, like you said, would be happy being in any other role unless he could compete for a starting job, and I just don't think he can compete here with the 49ers. So it's bon voyage for Jimmy G.
No, they're going full steam ahead with Trey Lance. Everything points to it, and it'll be once Jimmy Garoppolo is gone. It's going to be interesting to see how this thing all unfolds because I think the Ferns are going to be good. If they have some issues, things are going to be really interesting around Santa Clara.
Yeah, and I mean, Andrew says Mike Glennon's still out there. That's funny. That I mean, could you see the 49ers maybe bringing in another quarterback to shore up that room, or do you think they're really going to rock with Lance, Sudfeld, and Purdy?
Who's out there that you want to bring in? I don't think there's anybody out there that you're really.
That was something that really was intriguing to me, Jack, because I really did think that they would go after a guy and bring in a backup. I mean, Nick Foles just got signed to the Colts, right? Like there was still guys out there. I don't understand kind of what the thought process is as far as why they haven't brought somebody in. You would think that they'd want somebody unless they're really that high on Sudfeld. I just don't see it. He was like a third string quarterback on the Eagles. He's never really been a bona fide backup. So Andrew saying Baker is out there. Maybe they do, if they do end up trading with Carolina, maybe they bring Sam Darnold in that trade and kind of try to extend him to save some money on that contract. I don't know how it works with the 5th-year option, but maybe they still have a plan there.
I mean, they're if you were to bring Sam Darnold back, you're not saving a whole lot of money that way. You are saving about $7 million in salary cap if you swap the quarterbacks and do that. I think the reason the 49ers are with Nate Sudfeld is because he worked really well with Trey Lance. Trey Lance really liked him. They feel like he's able to he's just a really good sounding board for him, and he's from that standpoint, he's a really good backup for what they were looking for, because doing what they did with Sudfeld is just another point for me that the guy is Lance, and they wanted to have the guy that works best. Lance has talked about it himself, about how much help Sudfeld was to him, and I think that's the 49ers thought process with bringing him back was this guy works well with Trey Lance. Trey likes him. Trey trusts him. Between him and the quarterback coaches, he can be our backup quarterback, and if we need to put him in there, we can survive for a game or two. I think that's what their thought process is.
Yeah,
they don't have, and on top of that, I'm sorry to cut you off, but they only have remember they only have $600,000 in salary cap. Quarterback in the NFL, if you're worth your salt, most of those guys aren't going to be cost $600,000, $800,000.
Right.
Those are right now. The only way they can make it fit is if the guy was like $1.4 million. Beyond that, it doesn't really work for him.
Right. I mean, clearly the Jimmy choosing to do that surgery when he did, really put them in a bind as far as what options they had, because I have to believe, Jack, especially with how big of an Achilles heel the 49ers regime had to deal with when Jimmy was out. Like the drop off to a guy like Nick Mullins, a drop off to a guy like CJ Beathard, and still having a team that could compete, but just not having the quarterback play to be able to compete. I feel like Nate Sudfeld to me is more like Mullins and Beathard than what Lance was able to do for the 49ers last season. And I just hope that we're not reverting back to Kyle Shanahan's weak quarterback room that's been kind of the Achilles heel for the team and their success. So that's why I just thought last season when they talked about that being a big issue, like it seemed like, okay, they figured it out. Yeah, we need to have a bona fide second option there just in case, our hobbled quarterback gets more hobbled. Obviously, hopefully Lance is a lot more healthy than Jimmy is, but still injuries happen, and one or two, you can't go on a big losing streak in the NFL and expect to make the playoffs. So we'll see. It is a big question mark for me, that backup quarterback position.
Well, it is for me. This was something that I brought up late last year during the season, was if the 49ers move on from Jimmy Garoppolo this offseason, who's going to be the backup quarterback? If he's not there. And I remember there's people that write for a website, not mine, that both came back to me and said, I don't really care who the backup is. It doesn't matter. Well, we'll see what happens, because if the 49ers, if they do lose Trey Lance and they have to go to the backup quarterback, it's going to matter. And that could be the difference between winning games and losing games.
Sure. And there was guys available that could definitely upgrade the quarterback room, that because Jimmy and not being able to get that money off the books impeded in their ability, that they could have got for like $5, maybe $10 million max, like between that $5 to $10 million, and have guys come in to be able to spell that. So we'll see. I mean, I still think this team has the caliber to still win a Super Bowl. Obviously, no team really banks on the backup quarterback. If your starter goes down, you don't really think that you have Super Bowl aspirations, unless you're the Philadelphia Eagles. But yeah, I mean, Jack, thank you for coming on my channel, man. How about while we have everybody still in the chat, what can people look forward to for you this week?
This week's going to be a little bit light. Tomorrow, other than tomorrow I'm going to be up at OTAs for the practice. So I'll have a report after practice with that. Beyond that, this is graduation season. Between Thursday and Friday, there's kids graduating high school. My oldest is graduating on Friday. So it's going to make it hard to do the normal streams that I do on Thursday and Friday. So, I'll be getting content up, but it won't necessarily be the normal shows later in the evening like usual, just because I won't be able to with everything going on with the kids and high school graduations. Let's go.
Congratulations to your eldest. And look, nobody's going to be streaming too much Thursday night. Game 1 of the NBA Finals with the Warriors there. So I don't know how many people are looking for 49er news while the Warriors are playing. So
I don't know about that. So, if it was me, I would go live at 6 o'clock. That makes the most sense. You get, just because the Warriors are there, that's basketball. We're talking. This is football.
We're talking off-season football, not pads, not practice. We talking OTAs, baby.
We are talking practice. We're talking we talking practice. Not a game. Not a game. We're talking practice.
I love it. Well, Jack, thank you so much for doing it on my channel. Next week we'll be back on Jack Hammer's channel doing the throwback show. Guys, if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe to this channel. We are making the push to try to get to 1,000 as soon as possible. And Jack's links to not only his YouTube channel, but his writing at the Santa Rosa Press Democrat are in the subject or in the description. So make sure you take a look at his stuff. And Jack, anything else before we sign off?
No, just keep tuning in. Make sure you're subscribing to Suneil here. That's partly why we're on his channel, is to help him out. He does a great job on with what he does. I know Rohan was in the comment section earlier, and you guys do a lot of shows together over here. And give Suneil some love. He puts out great content, and he's a fan just like all of you. And show him some love.
Appreciate that, Jack. And like I always say, stay safe, stay hydrated, and we'll talk again very, very soon. I'm jumping on Jesse's channel right now, guys. So if you want some more of me, head over to Last Second Sports. Have a great night, guys.